The devastating Knickerbocker snowstorm of 1922. In 1922, a devastating snowstorm hit Washington, D.C. and surrounding areas with such force and fury. It left a lot of people injured or dead. In particular, the damage done to the Knickerbocker Theater and the casualties caused will be looked at in close detail. Imagine being in a crowded theater when all of a sudden the roof caves in. The biggest question is, what happened to the families who lost people after the tragic snowstorm hit? After more than 2 feet of snow had already landed in Washington, D.C. area, people had a very important decision to make. Should they fight through the greatest storm that area has ever seen to go to a grand movie theater called the Knickerbocker Theater? Or should they stay at home and be safe and comfortable? Never did anyone realize that their decision would be one of life or death. Unfortunately, that is how it played out. On the evening of January 28, 1922, several hundred people fought their way through a massive snowstorm to see the show at the Knickerbocker Theater, Washington's largest and most modern moving picture theater of the time. Everything was going pretty smoothly inside the theater, as the snow continued to fall outside the theater. Speaking of outside the theater, the snow was landing on flat rooftops, accumulating in large quantities. As the snowfall was accumulating, the weight was getting heavier and heavier, creating more stress on the rooftop to be able to support such added pressure. Shortly after intermission, the weight of the snow was just too much. George Brody had entered the theater moments before the rooftop had collapsed and gave the following account. I grabbed for my hat and coat, and the next minute I found myself flat on my face with something weighty on top. I lay still for about 5 minutes when I noticed at the side of me a girl with an arch or a pillow resting upon her. I tried to pull it off but couldn't move it. It was a frightful sight. Imagine the weight of snow crushing in the roof and walls of a crowded theater. Imagine being able to help yourself but having to leave several trapped bodies behind. Thankfully, police officers, firemen, and other first responders were there to save a lot of people. According to Kevin Ambrose, several fascinating and tragic family stories have emerged from my research. Stories that have passed down through word of mouth for 2 generations by Washington area families impacted by the disaster. Families of those injured or dead were not paid any settlement money. Even though the structure of the roof was not structurally sound, most of the help was proved by family and friends. There is a great story about a violinist in the Knickerbocker Theater named Oreste Natilio. According to Kevin Ambrose, Natilio lost an arm in the disaster and could no longer play the violin, so a group of vaudeville entertainers held a show in Louisville, Kentucky, called the Natilio Benefit Performance. The goal of the show was to raise money to help Oreste become financially established within the community so he could start a new life without his violin. The performance drew a large audience and raised a significant amount of money for Oreste. In conclusion, 98 deaths and 133 injuries could have been avoided if people would have stayed home. However, it is tough to blame people for seeking a good time. Perhaps more of the blame should go to the engineers of the Knickerbocker Theater. The building codes were updated to include the use of steel I-beams and better supports for the roofs. The Knickerbocker Theater was built rather hastily and with sloppy construction. This is unacceptable to endanger the lives of so many. Thankfully, for the support of the community, that people were able to move on with their lives. Sometimes tragedy brings people together for a common cause. In this case, the Great Storm of 1922 did just that.